All right. Thank you, Katie. So as you said, we're going to be talking about how to manage for quail and turkeys. So we'll go ahead and get started if it works. There we go. All right. So everybody has this question: where have the quail gone? And it's in some of our lifetimes, I've guessed people have noticed that. And so quail have experienced range and also population reductions since the 1960s, and populations have declined by as much as 80% in some areas. But why? So everyone seems to have their theories, and some are on the right track, but some of them aren't necessarily backed by scientific evidence. So we're going to run through a few of these just to kind of talk about where have the quail gone. But the first one that I hear people pretty often say is, well, the quail or all the turkeys have eaten all the quail. So since this is a managing for quail and turkey webinar, we're going to go ahead and call this a myth right now, get that out of the way. So everybody knows that quail or turkeys do not eat quail. Turkey diets have been studied extensively, and there's no evidence that turkeys eat quail eggs or quail chicks. But how this kind of stems, or what this myth stems from, is as turkeys were reintroduced and management really started kicking off for turkeys and turkeys started doing well, was the same time period that the quail were on the decline. So it's a pretty common misconception that they were the cause of the decline, but they're not. So things that are actually influencing the decline. We've got predation. Quail are very vulnerable during their nesting stages, where raccoons can eat the nests along with other mesomammals like possums, skunks, and also snakes are pretty big nest predators. And nest success generally ranges from only 20 to 50% at its best. So that's an important stage where predation could be causing some issues there. And also adult survival is really important because adults only have an average lifespan of like 6 to 8 months. And so they really only about 20 to 30% of the quail each year survive. So in a lot of the major adult predators are going to be hawks is the number one, but also if you think about, yes, bobcats will catch one if they can. Same with coyotes and other large predators like that, in addition to if a raccoon or a skunk can get their hands on an adult as well. But really, you think about how tasty they are. I don't blame any of these critters out there trying to catch quail. Another thing is pesticide and herbicide use, which has really started since the early 1900s. And there's several different types of herbicides, and they're generally farmers use them because they don't want weeds or pests in their fields to affect their yield, which is totally understandable. But they could have both direct and indirect effects on quail. If they're directly affecting them by if a quail were to eat a seed that had been pre-treated with a pesticide, then that could directly affect them. And then that could also influence their breeding success and overall survival. And then indirectly, they're also keeping those weeds out of their fields, which and also the insects, which are food for quail. So there's you think back in before herbicides really started taking off, there were a bunch of weedy fields, and that's when we had lots of quail. Another one is extreme weather events. With the climate changing, these are becoming more frequent, whether it's drought or flooding or heavy snow and ice storms. And since quail are kind of a boom or bust species, these weather events or extreme weather events becoming more frequent can possibly cause some issues also and cause some declines. But the number one driver of the decline in quail over all of these others is habitat loss. The changes in farming practices where they're using, where there's larger equipment, so the fields are larger, and clean farming practices, as you can see in that picture, but also suburban and urban sprawl that they're creating loss of habitat. And it's the loss of habitat and also the fragmentation of the habitat. Now you have isolated pockets of habitat that can support quail, but there's no, it's harder for populations to spread their genes around and migrate, or I guess they don't migrate, but move around. And it's just, and also the degrading of the habitat. So habitat's the number one reason why quail are on the decline. But although it's the number one driver, it's not the silver bullet. There's not just one thing that you can attribute to the decline in quail. It's all these things. Everything in nature is connected. So the decline in quail is all of these factors that are influencing the declines.
All right. So what about the turkeys? The trend over the past 30 years for the turkeys is just about the same decline as it is for the quail. Although it is in decline, we see more turkeys because they're more visible birds. That's why that myth that Caleb axed right off the get-go, shows up. The myth of the turkey eating the quail, because turkeys and quail use such, similar habitats that you're visibly seeing the turkeys out there, while those quail still may be hiding in the fence rows or hiding in that good cover. So kind of tailing on what Caleb was talking about, we've got the suburban and urban crawl. There's videos all over the internet of turkeys chasing the mailman around, or turkeys coming out and pecking cars in town. These animals, this was their home. That's where they've called home, and we the human have come out and expanded our territory into theirs. So in some ways we have to accept the fact that we're going to live with turkeys in our backyards, which if it was me, I'd be okay with that. The picture on the right side of the screen kind of depicts the transition of the monoculture farms. And even if you go to the 2020 photo and you take the 1/3 of the field and you make it a city, your wildlife that you see depicted there is probably going to be about the same. Also, if you look at the 1950 picture, when we're moving forward through this, talking about types of habitat, just look at all the different types of habitat in that one square area. That's what these birds need. Both quail and turkeys really like to have diverse options, lots of options to raise nests, to raise broods, and to live their life throughout the rest of the year. So as we go on, we'll talk about edge. Just note how much edge, how many different types of habitat are touching each other there versus the picture in 2020.
Yeah, just to add on there, one of the key things with management for both these species is the habitat mosaic. We'll go into that in more detail, especially on the forestry side with turkeys towards the end with me. But just to reiterate there, that the mosaic is one of the key aspects for survival of both of these species.
All right. So what does quail habitat look like? It's visually different across their whole range. You've got pine savannas down in southeast in Georgia, and then you've got mesquite brushy grasslands out in Texas, to areas with some grassland and fence rows that's more like around here. So I just want you to realize that quail habitat doesn't look like a brushy fence row everywhere. Their habitat is different across their whole range. But what's also important is what makes these all similar and able to support quail. And it's really the structure. All of these different habitats provide resources throughout the year for basically all the needs that a quail could have in that time period. And they have to have all of those in one place. And it's the structure of these different habitats that do that. And those three main pillars that I was just talking about, excuse me, are, okay, so those three main pillars that you need to have quail habitat are nesting habitat, brood rearing habitat, and protective cover. And without those three things, then you don't have quail habitat.
So moving on to the turkey, these pictures look exactly the same, and that's because the turkey habitat does differ across the nation depending on which subspecies of turkey you're chasing. But even turkey habitat just here in southern Illinois, it can range from just about any of that. You're looking at the mesquite, or down here we have autumn olive out in our prairies. So I've chased turkeys around in there, and I've seen successful broods moving around there. Again, the limiting factor is the structure to be able to have a successful brood. But there is one different type of habitat that a turkey does need in its lifetime, and that's the hardwood forests. They're an important part of what a turkey needs in its lifetime. At some point in time, those turkeys are going to be in the hardwoods bugging. They're going to be in the hardwoods getting acorns. They're going to be in the hardwoods to protect themselves from aerial predators. So while quail generally use only upland habitat, these hardwood forests are an important key for those turkeys.
Okay, so on those three pillars that I just talked about, we're going to go to the first one and talk about it a little bit, which is nesting habitat. So they're ground nesting birds, and they prefer to nest in warm season grass clumps, like here in this picture, which is a broom sedge. And they like broom sedge, little blue stem, and other warm season grasses, big blue stem, where they can get up underneath that bowl that on the bottom. And that's where they build their nest, is up underneath there, and they're pretty well concealed. But other grasses that you commonly see are cool season grasses, and the structure is different on those, so they don't provide great nesting habitat for quail. And the quail also like to nest near edges, usually within 50 to 100 feet of an edge. That's where you tend to find them. So think roadway ditches, fence rows with grassy cover down them, field borders or waterways sometimes, if they have the right structure to them. And so also predators like to work those edges. So we'll talk a little bit more about that, also how edge can influence predation.
So turkey nesting is a little bit different than quail nesting. Quail kind of will seek out those quality areas to make their nest, to build their nest, to try to have a successful nest. For whatever reason, the wild turkey doesn't really have a known reason for where they make their nest. They kind of get to the point where they're like, okay, I've got to lay an egg, I've got to start a nest, and they look for some sort of a vertical cover, something like a log or a stump, or just in the top picture, it's just a little bitty sapling of a hickory tree there. So a turkey just doesn't have that critical thinking of, I need to build my nest in a safe place. Although the hen in the bottom, she looks like she's nestled in there pretty good, pretty aware of where she's at, and has an exit for if there is a predator. The best way to beat this little quirk in turkeys is to maximize the amount of habitat, usable habitat that they can put in there. And Chase will go into this farther of how we can do this in our hardwoods and along the edges that we've talked about.
And just to bring back up the point I made earlier, the habitat mosaic is key. And there's definitely been some recent research. Dr. Chamberlain has produced some, and I believe some other folks have been working on it as well. That it's showing that there is no rhyme or reason to where and when a hen decides to nest. She pretty much plops out the tree and goes, yeah, it's time to lay a nest, and starts the process. In the past, everybody's kind of what's the old saying, beating the dead horse about you got to have nesting habitat, and stressed nesting habitat for turkeys. And the general concept is, very, very similar to quail habitat as far as that early successional grasses, et cetera, which is great, very great habitat for nesting. But like we're saying, this research is showing that there's no rhyme or reason to it. So that goes back to that point of the habitat mosaic, is you got to have these different habitats throughout your property, or throughout an area, in order to provide that quality nesting ground to be close enough for birds, hopefully that they'll utilize it. So I believe it was Dr. Chamberlain's research showed that if a hen laid a nest, just say in a bottomland hardwood forest or upland hardwood forest, and it was over 800 meters from the nearest brood habitat, which would be for turkeys is going to be very similar to quail, as far as the early successional grasses, then those poults, when they hatch, the chances of them surviving was about less than 5%, because they had so far to travel through open ground. So again, it's just kind of a unique quirk that we're discovering as we're getting back into researching turkeys. But it's something we're gonna have to work around. And again, it goes back to overall management and providing those different quality habitats.
All right, so the second pillar that I'm going to talk about is brood rearing habitat, which is showcased here in this video, which basically looks like a field full of weeds. But once you get down underneath, you can see how there's bare ground, there's little travel lanes through there, and it's also very 4B, has lots of broadleaf plants in there attracting insects. See how far you can see through there? That's what you need. And also the overhead cover is really important. And that's what you really need for quail, because when they come out of the nest, they're about the size of ping pong balls. So they got to be able to run through there and be able to get through there to forage and also avoid predators. I'll just let this one last image there. Yep, you can see how it's clear. Just think how easy you could roll a ping pong ball through that.
Yeah, and since you're rolling this footage here, Caleb, I'll just go ahead and bring up, as far as turkey poults go, that's ideal conditions as well. For turkey poults, I think it's coming up in a future slide here shortly. With turkey poults, the first 2 weeks of their life is very crucial time frame, because they can't fly. So they spend all their time on the ground. They need habitat like that where they can get in there, move around, feed. And just so you guys know, first 2 weeks of the turkey's life, they're looking at nothing but insects, because they've got to eat insects in order to have the high protein content in order to put on the wing feathers so they can fly. So that habitat is crucial, because that's going to hold a lot of insects for those poults to pick on, as well as providing the cover.
Yep.
So then the third and final pillar that we got here for quail is protective cover. And that's usually in the form of woody and hopefully native species like blackberry, sumacs, chokeberry, and also now I'm blanking on all the species, but any other time I could tell you. And they use that to escape from predators. You flush a covey, and usually the first place they fly is to the first available woody cover to them, and also just places for them to hang out during the day and have their covey headquarters. And then also for thermal regulation purposes, especially in both the summer and the winter, they can use it for shade in the summer, and then also protection from snow and ice in the winter and cold temperatures.
Turkey escape cover isn't as crucial. I shouldn't say as crucial. It is an important part of the turkey's life cycle, but we look at this more as brood habitat, because it's at that critical time, that first 4 to 6 weeks when turkeys really can't fly. So they're going to need this, those 4B areas where they've got the overhead vertical cover that can keep them hidden, provides good food source. So anytime you can find, those good shrubby components, those are going to be excellent areas for a turkey to go into. And also it starts those building areas for, those turkeys to learn how to jump up in a tree, or, just get a little bit up off the ground to hide from those predators. Turkeys don't really have to have this cover really nearby. Turkeys have been clocked at 25 mile an hour and have flown as fast as 55 mile an hour. so they can really escape from predators. Although, you know, your bobcats, they're just as sneaky, so they can sneak up on them just as easy. Again, you know, the brood rearing habitat is the key for the wild turkey. It's not really the nesting habitat. It's not the escape cover. It's that brood rearing habitat that is the critical, you know, key to turkey success.
All right, so now we've been through all these different habitat types and what you need to really satisfy those resource requirements from both quail and turkeys. But what should you be looking for if you're out on your property? So the first thing to look for is, do you have early successional habitat? Do you have something that's, whether it's just a weedy field or you got a fence row with some grasses down it, just some sort of early successional habitat is what we're really looking for. But ideally you got something like this here in the picture where you can see you've got some warm season grasses or any other you're looking for those warm season grasses while you're out there to know that you've checked off one of your pillars there. Is give them something to nest in. And then if the next one, so we're starting to look at brood rearing cover. If you're out in your weedy field that you've got and you got a ping pong ball, it's about the same size as a quail chick, and you take it out there with you. You just keep one in your pocket at all times. Then you just toss it out in the grass a couple feet from you. Can you see the ping pong ball? And does it make it to the ground? If it makes it to the ground, then it's a good sign that your cover is not too thick. But if it doesn't, then your cover is probably too thick. And also you want to be able to see it, because remember in that video showcasing the brood rearing habitat, how you could see through that cover, but not very much, because you need overhead cover also. And now we're moving over to the softball. Preston has the same thing with turkeys for that.
Yeah, and same concept with the softball for turkeys. There's another little trick that Caleb has with the softball and quail that can also relate with turkeys as well. But again, if you're not seeing that softball through there, it's probably too thick. Really, if you have a ping pong ball and it meets all those requirements, it's going to be excellent for a turkey as well. But, you know, size comparison wise, a poult for a turkey is going to be about the size of a softball versus a ping pong ball.
Yeah, and then also for the softball, we were talking about woody protective cover and its importance. So to kind of think of, if you can take a softball and you want to be able to throw it to the next piece of protective cover. And I know some people probably can throw a little bit further than others, but that's how it should be. You want it spaced out in a way that you maximize the habitat around you. You want them probably within 50 to 100 meters apart, or 100 yards is about good in there, but having them interspersed like randomly is best. And so just using those quick little tools to kind of go out if you're walking your properties, that can kind of cue you in on what you should be doing possibly to improve your habitat for quail and turkeys. And here's some ways that we're going to talk about after you've done your little test with your ping pong ball and softball. And then we're going to kind of come through or go through these here and talk about how these management techniques, you can use them to achieve quality cover for bobwhite and quail, or bobwhite and turkeys. And so the first one here is the fescue pasture to native prairie. So I've hit on fescue a couple times, how it's not great habitat for wildlife. The way it grows, it's sod forming. So we're talking about the importance of bare ground for broods. It's just like yard grass. There's no bare ground, and it's so thick that you couldn't, if you were the size of a ping pong ball, you couldn't really get through it. But converting that to what we're looking for in a native prairie type cover would be the way that you can improve habitat on your property. And kind of a quick and dirty, if you had to do this in 5 simple steps. First one is kill the fescue and kill it good. Just keep spray, and maybe even spray again. And then step 2, you got to prep it for your seeding. So you can do a burn or prescribed fire to clean up that dead fescue, or you can disc it. There's several different ways you can do that. Then you got to plant your native seed mixture. You can either frost seed it or drill it. Then your next step is to monitor it and be patient. It takes several years for these to really get established, but you also want to be looking out for non-native species or fescue coming back in. And then after it's established, your step 5 would begin to keeping that in an early successional stage through some of these other management techniques that we're going to get into here in a little bit.
Since Caleb brought up the old fescue, I know I hear a lot of times people talk about, oh, I always see Tom strutting out in a fescue pasture. And just go ahead and clarify that for folks that may have that question coming. Yes, you will find a Tom strutting in a fescue pasture, but fescue provides absolutely no nutritional benefit to turkeys at all. It is strictly just an area that you'll find a Tom strutting around. That's it. Just gonna go ahead, want to go ahead and get that one answered.
I think this one's you, Chase, on the
Oh yeah, sorry, I got talking too much. So yeah, so one of the next items there is going to be controlling your soft hardwood encroachment within your native oak hickory stands. You know, if you guys didn't know, this entire state, the native timber type is the oak hickory forest. And unfortunately, Illinois, particularly Southern Illinois, has the dubious honor of being one of the few states that is well on its way to converting into a climax forest of maple beech. So keeping those soft hardwood species knocked back and to promote your oak hickories is going to be crucial for overall management for turkeys in particular, but also as we'll get in talking shortly about edge feathering, stuff of that nature, that's going to have some impact to quail as well.
Our final management thing that we're going to talk about when we were talking about native conversions is the fence row, shrub row, corridor creations. Just like as Chase said, you know, the farmer planting the fescue fields for the cattle. The invention of the T-post has really limited the amount of fence row habitat that we have. Those connective corridors. No longer do we have the ability for 120 acre parcel of, you know, this, you know, hardwood forest that we need connected to another 20 acre parcel. Those animals are crossing out across the middle where they are susceptible to predators. So if, you know, we can go out and create those fence rows, those shrub rows, you know, it's not just good for the bobwhite quail and turkey. It's excellent, you know, connective corridors for the white-tailed deer, for the rabbits, for just about any kind of species out there. Just a little blip, you know, we down here have created the fence rows for Wildlife Habitat Initiative. So if you are interested in something like this, you know, talk to one of your local biologists. We have sometimes we have funds to put together some fence rows, some shrub rows. So if you've got 220 acre parcels that you just don't think the deer are moving, or you don't think the turkeys are connected, or really you're just wanting a spot to go chase a rabbit or a quail, get a hold of us and we'd love to help you put one together. Our next management technique is strip disking, and some of the reasons that we do a strip disc in our, you know, forb plantings or even in our warm season grass plantings is to increase the forb and the diversity that's there. As you can see in kind of the top picture, where we've disked and where we haven't, it looks like the grasses have gotten pretty thick along the edges. So the farmer, or the producer, landowner has went through and lightly strip disked, and then the following summer or the following growing season in the spring, summer, you've got this awesome, you know, diverse forb, you know, green layer coming up. Those areas are great for quail and turkey to obviously brood, as Caleb showed us in the video, because they hold insects, but, you know, just awesome areas, and that diversity is great for all wildlife moving. And then one note on light disking or on strip disking is it's light disking. We're looking at just scratching that top surface layer. We don't really need to see, you know, bare dirt. The dirt being turned over isn't really what we're looking for. We're looking just to disturb what's growing there currently to stir up the diversity, to stir up those seeds, to get them to grow the following year. So just remember that if you're plowing it like you're plowing a cornfield, it's too deep, that's too much, and you're going to end up getting dense ragweed or other invasive species that you really don't want. The next management technique is the herbicide application. This is a big one. This is one we get a lot of questions about. Is what do I spray? How much do I spray? When do I spray? The answer to that question is read the label. The label on that jug of chemical that you bought is going to be the key. It's going to tell you what it's going to kill, when it's going to kill it, how big it's going to kill it, how big it's not going to kill it. So, my best answer is to always read the label. While we do have some roundabout ways of saying, well, if you mix 2.5% of Roundup, it's going to kill fescue. We do have some baseline things, but we a lot of times don't know what we're looking at when we receive phone calls or emails. So if we, get those phone calls, sometimes it's best to set up, site visits to where we can go out and walk and talk on your properties with you. Just going to go over a few of the types of invasives that we are, keying in on currently. The top picture is Sericea lespedeza. It's affecting all of our native prairies across the state, into Missouri, down in Kentucky, Indiana. It's some nasty stuff. It spreads, and unfortunately, it really likes wildfire. Generally, if we burn it, it's not going to die. It's actually going to grow back thicker because its seed does need to stratify, and by burning it, that's what we're doing. So generally, we recommend to spray that in the middle of the summer or after a burn, as soon as it's coming back up. The bottom right picture is bush honeysuckle, autumn olive, very similar stuff. It grows in a bush, a clump. It can be considered a shrub, but it's not really a quality shrub. It's not one that's going to hold insects. Generally, it keeps everything underneath of it bare. It's the first thing to put out green leaves. It's the last thing to lose its leaves. So really, it's not letting those natives grow underneath before it's putting those leaves out. So for those reasons, we just don't like to see those out there. And then I'm going to let Chase kind of talk about multiflora rose, stiltgrass, and the other ones that are kind of affecting more deep south, and the hardwood forest.
Roger that. So we got multiflora rose there. It's in the rose family. It's a very prickly bush. It's very similar overall structure as far as bush honeysuckle goes. It's really clumpy. If it's got other shrubby stuff around it, it'll climb up it and get kind of high up. It's real hard to move through stuff of that nature. It provides basically no benefits from a wildlife standpoint. It's just an invasive species that's taking up resources that could be utilized by your crop trees or grasses, etc. Down into stiltgrass. Stiltgrass is a nasty one, guys. It basically makes a monoculture on the forest floor. Once it gets established or in a field, it'll start choking other things out and just make a mat of itself. It's real bad because stiltgrass grows and it dies off every winter, and all that thatch falls down and builds up. So year after year after year, you just get more thatch and more thatch. So it just makes it very thick on the ground level in regards to our poults and quail chicks that we talked about. It's nothing they can move through, and it provides almost no cover because it's so sparse up top the way it lays and blows. It gives a lot of visual looking down into it as far as predators are concerned. It's a hard one to treat. You can definitely treat it with glyphosate. It's probably one of the better ones out there. If you're worried about other grasses that may be in the area, you might want to treat it during the dormant season when your native stuff is going out, but it's still green. again, as Preston mentioned earlier about, application stuff goes, read the labels. Labels are the most important thing you can read when it comes to applying a herbicide. You don't read a label and you do it wrong, you can have a lot of negative impacts outside of your intended target species that you're trying to treat. And then the last two there on that list, garlic mustard and chaff flower. I personally don't have a lot of dealings with them currently, but they are popping up down here in southern part of the state a good bit. They tend to be more of a very low, 4 to 6 inch, give or take size, very, very small stature plant, but they end up basically just making a big mat, from my understanding on those, choking out all your native species. So you start getting an infestation of that, and then you start losing that native habitat that's beneficial. And they're also very hard to treat. Just like any of these invasive species, it's multiple years of treatment with herbicides. But those are, I know a lot of folks, when they have those patches, they actually end up going out and hand plucking them in order to try to really get rid of them. Just kind of a quick rundown on that stuff.
One of the most important yet most feared management techniques is prescribed fire. Fire is natural. It's a native, natural part of the landscape. It's been here for as long as humans been on the earth, and probably before that. So when we put fire on the ground, it's called prescribed fire for a reason, because we are prescribing it to the ground, because that's what the ground needs from us to bring back some diversity, to bring back those native species, to kill those non-native species that really aren't used to having that fire put on them. So that's, why burning is such an important part of the landscape, and, our overall plans for our habitat across the landscape. There's differences in dormant versus growing season burns, and what they do and how they affect the landscape. And then, overall, the picture there is a prairie burning. Your flame lengths are high. It's crazy. Whereas your woodland burns, for the most part, unless you get into some non-native honeysuckles, that, your woodland burns are going to be pretty low key, low intensity, that you're really just trying to creep across and get some of that non-native thatch, some of the dead leaf litter off the ground, where you're allowing those, those wild seeds, those native seeds to catch on the seed bed.
Yeah, just to elaborate a little bit more there as far as dormant versus growing season. The main reason you're going to look for a growing season burn, guys, is if you're trying to recapture the habitat. Let's say you've got an oak hickory stand that's got soft hardwood encroachment in it. Maybe it's got some bush honeysuckle, autumn olive, etc. When you get the right conditions and you burn during the growing season, all those species, early growing season, they've just put all the resources into sprouting out. Late growing season, you're catching them before they're going dormant. But your soft hardwood species, they're very thin barked. Same thing with your invasive species, very thin bark. So if you get a growing season fire through there, that fire comes through, hits that cambium layer on those species, and essentially cooks them from the inside out. Therefore, you end up usually getting a top kill. Now, granted, when we're talking about timber, there's a little bit of a size cap on that. About probably about 4-inch diameter is about the max that you're going to have a good fire kill on. It takes a really hot fire oak to get anything bigger than that. So early on in that transition stage there, when soft hardwoods are encroaching, fire is a great tool to use there. So again, growing season, you cook the cambium layer, you top kill those species, and then you can come back the next year, and if you got enough fuel on the ground, you can catch another fire and nuke it again, or you can come back and hit those stems with a herbicide application to effectively neutralize them. Once you get your stand established where you want it, as far as the oak hickory ecosystem is back, you don't have your soft hardwood encroachment, you don't have your invasive species, everything's rocking, then you switch to a dormant season fire, and you're basically just resetting the fuel load and promoting the vegetation. I'll go into timber management a little bit more shortly coming up, and it'll make a little more sense then. But that's the difference there. So growing season is kind of what you want to use to set the stage, knock back your invasives, knock back your soft hardwoods. Dormant season, your stands where you want it, and you just want to maintain it, knock back your thatch, fuel load, etc. Promote your species that you got there. And the same thing kind of carries over for, let's say a prairie setting. Dormant season, when you're just trying to, rejuvenate that species that are already there. Growing season, when you're trying to knock something out of it, particularly autumn olive.
Yeah. Or you're just trying to increase the diversity of forbs. A lot of times our growing season burns really knock back our dense grasses. A lot of times we get Indian grass, switchgrass that gets too rank, too thick. If you do a growing season burn on that, generally, we do see some knockback on those species, and it allows those, forbs to come back and really create that better brood habitat for the following spring.
Yeah, and so a general rule of thumb is your growing season burns promote more forbs, and your grasslands, and your dormant season burns promote more grasses. That's just kind of like a general rule of thumb. Not always, but sometimes. Or did you
This
talk
is a
about
great
this,
example.
Chase?
It's actually oak hickory burn that I assisted on. If you guys can see there, it's out in the distance, but flame lengths on this fire really never got above about 1.5 foot. We had a few spots where there was some invasive species and some down cedars that got hot, but other than that, across the whole, you're looking max a foot to 2 foot flame lengths. That's kind of your generic oak woodland burn that you're going to get. That should be your average flame height. It's a low intensity fire. You do a back and fire, let the fire eat into the wind, so it goes nice and slow. That gives you a longer residence time. So when you do have those soft hardwood species, that fire's sitting around that base longer, thus allowing it to cook that cambium layer. All right, so now we're going to get into some forest management stuff here. I think I'll let Preston start off with the edge feathering, and then I'll tie in there at the end with the FSI and stuff.
I think we go, Caleb.
Oh,
You're good. All right. So edge feathering is kind of a new technique, but it's kind of revolves back to that first, pictogram from the 1950s to 2020 type thing, where you're looking for, you're really trying to get as many types of habitat right next to each other to create as much area for all the wildlife as you can. The diagram here kind of shows what we're looking for when we're going from edge feathering. I mean, you got the fence line there where you probably have your fescue cattle field. Then we get into your diverse, your forbs, your forbs, your foxtail, and you start to get into some shrubby content, and then you kind of work your way up almost as if you're just climbing up the fence. So if you're looking at that pictogram there, where you've probably got 20 to 30 feet of it. So if you look at this, when we talk about feathering, that's kind of edge habitat in the way I'm looking at it. If we're talking about feathering, now I'm looking at trying to go into the hardwoods there where the turkey and the deer are standing, and I'm trying to take out back into the hardwoods to kind of create your ins and outs, almost like mountaintops or feathers that are coming back into the woods. That creates the maximum amount of edge that turkeys can use for nests or quail can use for nests, but also creates a longer edge for the predators to travel to, where there's more likely of those nests to survive in there from the predators. So when we're talking about edge feathering, it's basically softening up that edge where it's no longer ag field all the way up to the edge of the trees and then hardwood trees after that. We're looking to try to intermix the hardwood and the field edges to that early successional habitat, and just try to weave those together to create that transition zone that we're looking for to maximize the habitat. Again, this is kind of goes back to what I was talking about, the hard edge versus the soft edge. The picture on the left kind of shows you that gathering up transition, and you can kind of see how the woods line cuts back in a few spots where you're going to have some of those shrubby components back into the interior, back into the inside the edge of the hardwood forest. The picture on the right shows kind of the hard edge where we're talking. It goes directly from a ag field to a hardwoods. The picture on the left is going to be a lot more valuable to wildlife than the picture on the right is.
All right, guys, so now we're going to get into the timber centric side of this, forestry centric. Just some base background here. Most forests within the state of Illinois, particularly down here in the southern part where I'm based, most of these forests are overstocked. They're usually running anywhere between 120 to 160 basal area. And so I included a description here of basal area. So basically, as you can see, basal area is just a square foot estimate of covers that timber takes up per acre. Like I said, these stands are overstocked. The ideal basal area is going to run, again, it's management objective dependent. But in most cases, when you're trying to maximize wildlife and timber, you're looking at somewhere around a 65 basal area, maybe 70 basal area in that vicinity. Kelly, you can go and hit the next slide.
But one quick thing on that, for turkeys, they like a little bit higher basal area, but down in the southeast in the pine savannas for quail, basal area is right around 30 or 40. So it's even way lower to get that understory cover for that quail need.
Yeah. So in order to, kind of maintain that basal area, there's several techniques we can use. One is mid-story removal, which I'm about to discuss. Another one that's coming up is going to be crop tree release. And then the last one that I'll talk about is just going to be kind of canopy gap openings, creating canopy gap openings. So start with mid-story removal. For instance, this here, you can see these two pictures. The left picture is before the mid-story removal, and the right picture is after. These pictures are both taken from almost the same spot. I was a few feet off. Now you can see the difference in sunlight that's reaching the forest floor here. This stand's actually on the Shawnee National Forest. We did a mid-story removal there up to, I think it was 9 inches in diameter, taking out nothing but soft hardwood species. And all those were treated with a herbicide application of triclopyr. But again, the key here is by doing that, we've opened up the canopy as a whole throughout the stand. We're letting sunlight get down. We've dropped the basal area, so we're going to have more resources to our remaining crop trees. And then we're going to have that, with that sunlight hitting, we're going to have a herbaceous flush. So when you do something like this mid-story removal and then combine it with a prescribed fire, you should have a really nice herbaceous vegetation flush in there, which is going to basically take a timber stand that before, as you can see on the left, is fairly dark, limited sunlight getting down, is now open with a lot of sunlight reaching, and it's going to go from being a hard edge, as Preston was saying earlier, if you're on a field line. Now we're going to take that early successional habitat and kind of scatter that underneath that timber stand. So now you've got, you may have a nice big patch over here that's all herbaceous underneath the stand, then it may get a little thin over here, and then it gets patchy again. So we're expanding it and taking what used to be a linear block per se down the side of a field, and we're fading that into the timber stand. So it's going to maximize our habitat, as well as creating a lot more search area, which is going to help decrease overall predator success. Your next slide, bud.
One thing on that though, that sunlight allowing to hit the floor, and the big timber, the Shawnee National Forest, the Mark Twain Forest, even as you're going out farther west, there are less openings in the woods. So where are those turkeys finding the brood habitat that they need? It's in those areas that have been thinned out. It's that herbaceous flush that's on that forest floor there that has created that quality brood habitat. So when we talk about brood habitat, it's not just the open prairie fields that we're looking for. It's actually that herbaceous flush that you can get under a stand when you let that sunlight in. So,
yeah, another important point I forgot to mention with that is, if you're going to do these forestry management techniques to your timber on your property, either before or immediately after you need to treat any invasive species you have, because you're going to be releasing sunlight to them and they're going to explode if you don't. And this in regards to turkeys in particular, if you don't treat these invasive species, they make a monoculture. You know, turkeys like to be able to see, and they can't see, they're not going to be in the habitat period. You go ahead and back forward there, Caleb, the crop tree. So another technique we can use is called crop tree release. So, you know, general rule of thumb is you want to release your timber on at least 3 sides. So for instance, let's say that, say you've got a stand that's got some really good overstory oaks, but it's got some smaller diameter maples or, you know, elms, something of that nature that are starting to creep up there and reach into that canopy and touching the crown of your desired oak tree. You can come in and do this right here and release that oak tree so that all the resources that those competition soft hardwoods are taking up is going to be released. It's going to allow that oak to put on more growth, put on more mass production, which is going to eventually lead to more food for your wildlife, particularly turkeys, as well as it's going to help that tree by putting on more acorns. It's going to be more regeneration potential down the.
All right. Chase, did we lose you?
Hear me?
It looks frozen.
Yeah. Okay. We
There
got
we
you
go.
back.
Okay, there we go. Yeah, if you'll, yeah, I got an internet notice on my computer now. Can you switch to that next slide, Caleb?
Yep.
There we go. So there's an example. You guys can see the trees that are labeled crop tree, and you can see the red X's. So the red X's would be where stems that were coming up and touching the crowns of those crop trees were taken out. So you see the gap that's created that's going to allow your crop tree to expand its crown and therefore hopefully eventually put on some more mass production. Next one.
As well as that sunlight, you know, continuing to hit the ground too.
Right. So
it's not just the
yeah.
mid-story that you cut out that allows the sunlight. You know, if you're doing the crop tree release, you're really letting maximum amount of sunlight come in at that point.
Yep. And it kind of ties right into this one here. So then one of the last ones I was going to talk about is creating canopy gaps, which you're also doing that when you're doing a crop tree release. But in this particular situation here, this was a landowner's property I was working on, and he had a pretty decent oak hickory stand here, but he had some very large maples and elms up in that overstory that were, you know, anywhere but in 12 to 14, 16 inch diameter. And what they did was they came through and cut these trees down. And you can see here, you've got this nice big canopy opening that's come from that tree being cut out. You can see the amount of herbaceous flush that's on the ground there. I actually have a video from this same spot, but just from this landowner having that tree removed, I walked around that one spot right there and there was over 20 oak seedlings popped up that is seeded in from the adjacent oaks. So that's another technique. If you've got a good stand, but you have some large diameter soft hardwoods mixed in, you can just go in and knock those soft hardwoods out, create these canopy openings. You're going to create some early successional habitat, but as well, you're going to potentially get some pretty good oak and hickory regeneration out of it. That's all I got prepared for that.
Did the slide change?
Yeah, I think
Are you good on this one, Chase?
Yeah, that's just our new tagline there. Healthy habitats, healthy harvest. You know, like I said, that's I didn't want to get way down in the weeds as far as discussing, because I could talk for a while as far as the stuff goes, but just want to kind of give you guys a high level overview and why things are important. My contact information is going to be on, I believe it's the next slide.
We got this one still.
Oh, you got that one too. So yeah, go ahead, guys.
Yeah. So just kind of an overview of some programs that can help you accomplish your goals of quality habitat on your land. I know we have a few other webinars. NWTF has a few webinars on different programs, but all of our biologists, NWTF foresters, and in multiple states across America there can help you get into the right program that fits your plan, your management goals, whether it be deer, quail, turkey, all of the above. We've got CRP. When we're talking about CRP, you got your prairie CP2s, your CP42, your pollinators, and then you get into your hardwood plantings of CP3A, CP22, CP31. It looks like numbers and letters there to most, but those are pretty critical programs to get you funds to help you maintain your balance of structure across your property. EQIP is one that Chase deals with a lot, in the fact that he writes forest management plans, and those management plans can result in payment for doing your invasive removals, your timber stand improvements. So if he wants to elaborate a little bit on that, he can in a second. A couple other ones, CSP. DNR has a conservation stewardship program that if your land is in a different tax bracket to where you can get a tax break for showing the DNR or showing the state of Illinois that you are managing your property for wildlife. Essentially, you are farming your property for wildlife, so you get that farming tax rate. And then sometimes when you talk to us, you set up field visits with your local biologist. Sometimes we do have special grant funds to get some projects done. A lot like what I talked with the Fence Rows for Wildlife initiative. We do have grants that pop up from time to time that can help support funds. Your other way is to talk to chapters. Sometimes chapters need to do habitat projects that they'll have a certain amount of funds sitting there to do habitat projects. So if you're on your own property, or if you're looking around state ground or federal ground, sometimes our chapters have funds to help do improvements. So if you're out hunting or hiking or walking and you see an infestation of invasives and you say, that's not good, come talk to us. We may have some funds to help knock those out.
Yeah, just to elaborate a little bit more there, EQIP is probably one of the most commonly used forestry programs that I work with. If you guys are interested in it, to reach out to your local office. I service pretty much just about everything south of I-64. I don't get into Jefferson or Washington County, but basically Perry County, Randolph, Monroe, over to Franklin, and over to Saline and Gallatin in the south. I definitely work with all those counties. But yeah, just reach out to your local county office, tell them if you're interested in forestry stuff, and tell them that you'd like to work with me, and they'll give me your contact info, et cetera, and we'll go from there. CSP, as they've got listed here, USDA CSP program is another great program for forestry practices as well. I guess I should alleviate too. EQIP is a 10-year program with forestry, and CSP is a 5-year program. So it kind of depends on what you're looking at long term there. But either program is a really good program, just so you can help get some cost work to get management done on the ground. And then one last thing to add is that IDNR offers a forest, I believe it's called Forest Development Act program, FDA for short. So if you're a forest landowner and you have 10+ acres of property and you want to actively manage, you have to have a current management plan. That plan can then be applied for FDA through the IDNR forester. And you say you're working with me, I would write a plan for you, make sure everything's good with you with the plan. Then I would fill out the paperwork for you, submit it to IDNR to be approved. IDNR will review it and then approve it. If they have any questions or anything, they'll work with me to get it resolved. Then they'll get you approved. That gives you a little bit higher tax credit than the IDNR CSP plan does.
Again, contact your local biologist, your local NWTF forester. Chase said he covers south of 64, but I believe there's one, maybe two other NWTF foresters across the state.
we haven't rehired one, so currently there's just one other forester besides me. Her name is Stacy Lindemann, and she's based out of Shelbyville. She pretty much does the Illinois Kaskaskia River basins. So she comes down almost to Randolph County as far as the river goes, but runs all the way back up. I'm trying to remember how far north she goes now. I don't want to speak for her because I can't say for sure. But if you guys got any questions, if you happen to be up more that area, just reach out to me, and I can get you in touch with Stacy and see if she can help you out.
And then, both links to our local state websites are listed there. You can get on to the ihuntillinois.com, click on Team Illinois, look at all our biologists. Our team is ever growing. So, it changes by the day, but generally across the whole state of Illinois, we have someone who either covers those counties or can stretch out and come visit you or talk to you about what you can do on your own properties. So, use those two websites if you'd like to contact us. We'd love to help you get your goals, your plans accomplished.
Yep, as you guys can see, all my contact info's there. Just email had an extra S in it. It's C and then SEALS. Just take the S out before the L on that email. Everything else is good to go. But yeah, I'd be more happy to answer any questions for sure related for you guys. Whatnot, feel free to hit me up now and here, or feel free to reach out to me afterwards, email or phone call.
So we did have two questions. I know, Chase, they were directed towards NWTF or you specifically. So I know when you're presenting, it's hard to see the chat. One of the first questions, since you were kind of talking about it, is they did ask who covers Wayne County for National Wild Turkey Federation. I'm assuming that would be yourself, or would that be kind of Stacy's area?
Give me a second. Let me see where Wayne County is. I guess I
That's
should
where
tell
I'm at.
everybody too. I'm not originally from Illinois. I'm from Alabama. So if I'm out of my area down here in the South, I got to look up where things are.
It's the county north of Hamilton that you've been in.
Let's see here. I will check with Stacy, but I think Wayne County is going to kind of fall in our no man's zone. So the NWTF foresters are based on focal areas that kind of overlap with IDNR's areas of importance where they try to focus their work. So I work predominantly Shawnee Hills, and then Stacy does the Illinois Kaskaskia River basins. And then whenever we hire back the third forester, he or she will be based out of the Driftless area up in Northwest Illinois. Now, that being said, if we get everything caught up, can we step out a little bit? Yes, we can. I'll have to reach out with her and see kind of how close she comes versus me and that kind of stuff. As far as Wayne County, if you're looking for a management plan or something of that nature, feel free to reach out to me, and we could talk about it a little more. But as far as at the exact moment, I can't say I can cover, she can cover, because that's kind of our dead zone.
Right. And then we also had the question, what is the typical use of the trees that are cut down? Any use for lumber, or are they just used for firewood?
In most cases, when you're cutting timber out of a stand, let's say you're doing a mid-story removal or a crop tree release, most of that stuff's probably not big enough for lumber. You could definitely, if you wanted to, remove it for firewood, if you're on private ground, of course. But it also does provide some benefit being there in the woods, because it's going to, as it starts to decay, it's going to be attracting grubs and insects, stuff of that nature. So it's going to inadvertently provide some additional forage. And when you're dealing with larger diameter trees that are getting dropped, those tops make really great habitat. I find deer bedded up in tops all the time, in stands that have been harvested or had a crop tree release or something done to them that has dropped some larger diameter stems. Deer, like I said, deer will bed up in that. Those tops also make great areas for rabbits to hang out, stuff of that nature. So just because it may look unsightly doesn't mean it doesn't have a benefit. So just kind of, as far as private ground goes, it depends on your objective. If you're wanting it to be more aesthetic, then yeah, you can remove it if you want to. But like I said, it does have some benefits leaving lay.
All right, well, we definitely appreciate everyone joining us this evening. We are recording this presentation. We will be sharing a link with all the individuals that registered. Probably be sometime tomorrow that we'll get that link posted up onto YouTube and shared out with everyone. We do encourage you to visit the Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever website, ihuntillinois.com, or visit the National Wild Turkeys website, which I did share the link in the post. It's nwtf.org/about/state/Illinois. Definitely encourage you to reach out to the biologist. We've got several of them across the state. We will, for Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever, we'll be having a couple more positions come in Southern Illinois soon. But we also encourage you, if you are a landowner looking for a good program, next week on the 28th of April, we will be having our last webinar of the series, which is with the Illinois Recreational Access Program. This is just one of those programs that is ran through the DNR that allows for limited hunting access on private property, but is a really great program for landowners that are looking to get some assistance with habitat management, along with getting a yearly stipend for allowing anywhere between 2 to 5 hunters on their property, if that. So we definitely encourage you to register for that. And once again, thank you everyone for joining us, and we hope that everyone has a great night.